Hi again. So, what about criminal law on an international scale? Well, to be honest, it's a little bit easier to look at. The body of criminal law is a little more condensed and a little bit more straightforward than our understanding of public law on an international scale. And part of that is due to the origins of international criminal law. So, in the 1940s, we obviously had the Nuremberg trials to determine what we were going to do with some of the major players in the Nazi genocide. And that helped to establish a plan going forward for what international criminal law was going to look like. In some terms, this aligns with the goals of the United Nations that was being formed at the time, insofar as Chief Justice Jackson puts it, that we wanted to bring the weight of law and criminal sanctions to bear in support of the peaceful and humanitarian principles of the United Nations. So the Nuremberg tribunals establish a lasting legacy of really creating the core principles that will carry forward in international criminal law. The first is that individuals can be charged with crimes, especially when those crimes rise to the level of a gross violation of human rights. Things like genocide, things like war crimes, that can rise to this sort of international level of offense to humanity itself. This helps to create a new norm of accountability. Essentially, countries are not just accountable to themselves. Individuals within countries are not just accountable to the country that they live in. There is a greater sense of justice. There is some kind of requirement to enforce that justice within your country, even if it's members of your own government that are committing such atrocities. And as I said, if the country is unwilling or unable to do so, then there needs to be some kind of intervention, some larger organization or some more powerful organization that will intervene on those fronts. This is a challenge to our standard understanding of state sovereignty. Essentially, states are not purely sovereign unto themselves. They do have to answer to some kind of higher power in the international system. So what that higher power is doesn't come into effect for several decades. You may be surprised to know that the International Criminal Court doesn't fully come into effect until 2003. Despite the passage of the Rome Statute, which helps to create this International Court in 1998, it took several years for them to hear their first case. But we have this new establishment of an International Criminal Court that is tasked with investigating and prosecuting individuals under international criminal law. They can do so for any kinds of gross violations of human rights. This is an organization that is essentially granted a universal jurisdiction over members of any country. But it's a treaty organization. It's not a UN court. It's not associated with the United Nations. It's entirely separate. And so members have to sign on to the Rome Statute in order to be held accountable for it. That means that not everyone is a member. There are 123 states that have fully signed on, fully ratified the Rome Statute, and therefore are held accountable to the principles of the ICC. There are additional 31 countries that have signed the Rome Statute but have not ratified it independently within their countries. So signing but not ratifying under international treaty law basically means that you agree to refrain from violating the principles of this treaty. So these countries have signed on to say that they're not going to allow individuals in their country to commit these kind of atrocities, but they don't fully ratify their inclusion within the ICC. So they don't instantly accept the prosecution abilities that the ICC has. And then there are also 4 countries that have at one point said that they would, consider signing on to the Rome Statute, but have since said, no, we have no intention of doing so. Those 4 countries are Israel, Sudan, the United States, and Russia. Now, you may be surprised, thinking that countries like the United States and Russia, as some of the greatest powers in the world, would have a vested interest in ensuring the stability and the legitimacy of something like the ICC. Well, they don't. They have bigger concerns. They are more worried about being prosecuted under the ICC for the things that they have done, and they don't want to give over that kind of power to another organization outside of their own country. Essentially, these countries have said, nah, we'll take care of it ourselves. It is important to note then that the majority of the world's population, places like US, Russia, China, India, two of the largest populations in the world, are not signatories to the International Criminal Court. So the majority of the world's population is not under the jurisdiction of this directly. So when I say directly, what do I mean by that? Well, this is a treaty organization, which means that it is reliant on a principle of consent from its signatories. Essentially, that really helps to limit what kind of jurisdiction the ICC has. It has jurisdiction when the accused, an individual that's accused of these crimes, is a member of a party state. If the actions took place within the territory of a party state, the ICC can have jurisdiction. And if a non-party state, say the United States, willingly accepts the jurisdiction of the ICC in an individual case, then it can have that jurisdiction. There is also a provision here that the UNSC can refer cases to the ICC under its peace and stability mandate in Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. So let's take a quick look at the track record of the ICC. There are 8 countries that have had official indictments from the ICC against individual members of their country. These are Uganda, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Central African Republic, Kenya, the Ivory Coast, and Mali. There are also 2 countries, so to round out the 8, there are also 2 countries where the ICC has made recommendations to the UNSC under that Chapter 7. Those are Sudan and Libya. That's led to a total of 39 indictments since it started in 2003. That's a pretty small number compared to the overall number of incidents that have happened in the world since this time that could be considered this, level of genocide or ethnic cleansing. We have questions about this all the time, and they are being investigated in the ICC, but it's very rare for these indictments to actually come down. Also interesting to note that so far all of these cases have happened on the continent of Africa, and all of them have been in situations of ongoing conflict. So the ICC, in a somewhat different fashion than the ICJ, takes cases as they're happening. It doesn't wait until cases are concluded in order to start issuing indictments and to try to make a change. So then what are some of the concerns with the ICC? Well, just like the ICJ, it lacks the enforcement mechanisms to actually carry out its own decisions. It is still reliant on all of its member states to do anything about it. And this comes to a head sometimes, especially in areas where it may have limited jurisdiction or power. Specifically non-party states. What is it supposed to do when it makes a decision in something like the Darfur case? It sanctions Omar al-Bashir and says we need him arrested. We need to bring him before the ICC and investigate what exactly, he has committed so that we can make recommendations about how best to punish him. And then Sudan doesn't produce him, doesn't arrest him, doesn't do anything, because it doesn't have to. This is a major problem with the efficacy of the ICC. It's still reliant on that compliance of member states and non-member states to have any effectual force in policy. There's also a big question of the potential bias of the ICC. All of the cases that it has heard have all been on the continent of Africa. What about the great powers? What about the acts that the United States committed during the war in Iraq that many around the world would consider to be war crimes, but we have not in any way, shape, or form accepted the power of the ICC, so there's no one that can actually charge us with war crimes? What about the current events happening in Myanmar, where the Rohingya are being ethnically cleansed by all accounts, and yet there's not been a formal investigation issued by the ICC in those events? So there certainly is a question here of why it is that there are only these specific cases that have been chosen. And also, as far as the financial burden goes, the ICC is exorbitantly expensive. It has an annual budget of $140 million and yet has only issued a total of 39 indictments in 8 cases in countries in Africa. So whether the ICC is really the most effective method or whether it is the best institution to carry out this kind of international justice, still a pretty legitimate question we have to ask. So that's an overview of international criminal law. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you don't plan on committing any atrocities anytime soon, because I don't want to see your name come up on the International Criminal Court's roster. Hopefully you have a good day. This is going to date the video, but enjoy the snow that's out there today, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks.